Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Author in Residence series on the Unicorn Within. My name is Colin Mahan. I'm a Director of Programs at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit that's building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. As you will see in the chat in a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So check out those links and resources in the chat. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Firstly, let us know where you're dialing in from in the chat. Says I'm on mute, but let me know if you can hear me, team on the call. Secondly, we're going to open up for live Q&A near the end of the event, so please submit those questions for us in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. We will try our best to get to them all. Now, none of what we do here at the center could be possible without all the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, Microsoft, BPM, and HubSpot for startups. We're grateful and humbled by their contributions and hope you're grateful too. Now, before we get started, I'm going to launch a quick poll just to take a step back and see how all of us are doing out there. So I'm going to launch this first poll to just let us know how you're feeling about your business right now. We're nearing the end of the year. I can't believe how fast 22 has gone by. So let us know. We use this information to understand the wellness and mental health resources that we should be providing for our founders out there. So let us know. And I'm going to end this poll in just a moment, but thank you for voting. All right, I'm going to share those results. Looks like optimism is in the lead, but know that there's a little bit of survival mode and anxiety out there. The second poll that I'm going to launch is what is keeping you up at night? So for those of you feeling a little bit of the survival mode out there and the anxiety, let us know what's keeping you up at night in terms of your business. We use this information directly to book the next couple months of topics that we should be providing for you, the entrepreneurs, and our community. All righty, Atlanta, nice. New York, San Francisco. Welcome, welcome. Hopefully you can hear me out there. Orange County, all right, awesome. Well, I don't want to delay too much before Philadelphia, welcome. Before we jump into the topic for this afternoon, but I'm going to share this results. Looks like sales and finance followed by marketing, a little bit of team and scale. So we'll make sure to take a note of that and fill the calendar over the next couple months. So without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome in that chat to our special guest today. Linda Yates is the founder and CEO at Mach 49 and author of our Author in Residence series guest, The Unicorn Within, How Companies Can Create Game-Changing Ventures at Startup Speed. Linda, welcome.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Colin. Thanks, everybody. It's really, really great to be here with you. I'm going to share my screen. So number one, if you guys can, there's two things you can share in the chat. Just make sure you can see these slides.
Looks great. If you just hit that play button, we should be rolling. All right, you look great. Over to you.
Perfect. Awesome. All right. So just a little bit of introduction. My name is Linda Yates, and I am the founder and CEO of Mach 49. Mach 49 is it's the growth incubator for global businesses. And I am a native Californian, which is only interesting because I grew up with all the people who founded the venture capital industry. They were all friends of my family. And so I've been deeply rooted and connected here my entire existence, but most of my professional career has been in the boardrooms and the C-suites of the Global 500. So investment banking, corporate finance, M&A, back to graduate school at Stanford, and then on into kind of traditional strategy consulting before I founded a company with the two professors who basically pioneered the field of corporate innovation, Gary Hamel and C.K. Prahalad, back in 1994, which just means I've been doing this work a long time. Fast forward to about 10 years ago now, and I am a huge believer in the ability of large companies to disrupt themselves from the inside out to drive meaningful growth as a result of the success that we had at Strategos. I'm also a longtime investor and board member with traditional startups, having grown up here in the Silicon Valley. And so, we basically were looking around and seeing lots of large companies flock to the Silicon Valley because about 50 years ago, when the Silicon Valley was founded, all the VCs were really investing in the dreamers, all the people going after and creating the new industries. But about a decade ago, they started investing in the disruptors. Many of you who are sitting in the audience who are basically going after the large companies. And so large companies were flocking here looking for that innovation fairy dust to be sprinkled upon them. And I'm not a big believer in innovation tourism or corporate tourism, but I am a big believer in the ability of companies to disrupt themselves from the inside out, to do venture building and venture investing to drive meaningful growth. So we founded Mach 49 basically to become the Y Combinator for the Global 1000. And what's very, very different about us is that we are focused 100% on execution. We don't do strategy, we don't do consulting, we don't do operations improvement. We really are here to help people create, build, and launch new ventures, and to do that on a perpetual basis. If they're a large company, if they're a startup, then we're giving them tools, methodology, process to basically do it and do it well. As many of you know, in Silicon Valley, we talk about our unicorns, but guess what? We have a lot of roadkill as well. And that roadkill is really unnecessary. The statistics are about 12% companies do well. That's not a very high hit rate. And we believe that we can drive that higher. So we're really focused both on kind of the venture building, also on the venture investing. So because for large companies, and this is important for you who are startups, because large companies can become great partners for you. So they have the option to build, but they can also partner, invest, and buy. So it matters even to, there's a wide swath of you on this call. Some of you are from bigger companies, some of you are pure entrepreneurs, but the message hopefully will resonate with all of you in terms of what the opportunity is for you to do venture building or corporate venturing in the sense of buy, partner, invest as well. And those are opportunities for the startups. There are two things that are very unique about us. Number one, besides the focusing on execution, we banded together. I hired no consultants. I basically said, I only want people who have done this before. So we are a cadre of successful serial entrepreneurs, top tier VCs, and C-suite execs who created about $50 billion in companies that we've invested in, managed, created, or built. So hopefully there is a lot for you guys to learn from kind of what we've done. But the most important thing is basically that when we banded together in essence to build capability, not dependency. And so we have invested 10 years basically in creating a teachable, repeatable, scalable model filled with methodology, tools, templates, processes, et cetera, to, in essence, enable people to have a much higher hit rate as they're doing venture building. Whether you are an internal entrepreneur inside of a Global 1000, or you are an entrepreneur sitting somewhere in a global ecosystem of innovation, whether it's Tel Aviv or San Francisco or Mumbai or Singapore or Cape Town. It's really, really important for people to have that. And so after 10 years, we basically wrote the book to, in essence, democratize what we do. And that's what we're going to talk about today is how can you create game-changing ventures at startup speed, whether you are an internal entrepreneur working in a large company, or you are a traditional Silicon Valley type startup looking to kind of go public one day on NASDAQ. So I'm going to start this early. The first couple of pages are really going to be targeted towards those people who are in these big companies. And then we're going to go into much more detail about what we think are the preconditions for success and the activities that those of you who are entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs really should be paying attention to. So, part of the reason we exist is that for the last 2 years in a row, Jamie Dimon, who's the chairman and CEO of JP Morgan Chase, has basically written a letter to his shareholders saying that what keeps him up at night is that the Silicon Valley is coming and they all want to eat our lunch. At the same time, you had John Chambers, who's the former CEO of Cisco, basically going around the world on his farewell tour, in essence, ranting to rooms full of CEOs that he's sorry to say that within 10 years, 40% of you will be out of business because 70% of you are going to attempt to go digital, but only 30% of you are going to succeed. And unfortunately, the statistics for big companies, bear these gentlemen out. If you look at the Fortune 500 list 50 years ago, the average life of a company on the Fortune 500 list was 75 years. Today, it's 15 years and declining. Of those companies on the list 50 years ago, 88% of them are out of business, off the list, or completely irrelevant. Only 12% remain. And even if you don't believe that large companies are going out of business, and I happen to be a big believer in large companies, and I believe in the partnership between large companies and startups, the large companies have left a lot of money on the table. There are today about 1,200 unicorns with a total valuation of about $4 trillion. So there's really, really no excuse for these large companies to have left this much money on the table. And as we like to say, the barbarians are still at the gate. You've got all of the Sandhill Road and other venture capitalists, from Mark Andreessen, who's pictured here with Sequoia Capital, Foundation Capital, Benchmark. You've got all these incredible venture capital firms sitting on billions of dollars of capital, looking to invest in disruptors like you guys, many of you guys, to basically go after create new markets, but also disrupt existing ones. So we really do believe this is the time for global businesses, for startups, even in a downturn, to focus on action and execution, and to build and invest in new markets to basically drive meaningful, sustainable growth. Large companies have talent, ideas, brand, resources, capital, technology, channels, and customers. Literally, they have all the ingredients to create startups from within. There's literally no reason Marriott could not have created Airbnb, or that Uber could not have come out of Toyota. Actually, Blockbuster had 3 chances to buy Netflix and said that will never work. And really no reason that Jamie Dimon or any of his peers on Wall Street couldn't have created Stripe, which even in a downturn is worth about $75 billion in terms of market cap. There's literally no reason these companies can't do it. So that's really kind of my opening for any people who are here with large companies. Now, as we go forward, I'm really going to get into kind of the methodology, the tools, and the ways to create really, really successful startups, whether you're doing it from inside or you're doing it from the outside. And really, the not so secret of the Silicon Valley is it's not that hard. But here are the 3 underlying principles to what we're going to talk about today. Number 1, you must understand customer pain. If you are an entrepreneur, you have got, and you can't tell me what the pain, what's your hypothesis on the pain you are trying to solve, I will not invest in you. So, and what I say to people is, listen, nobody in the world knew they wanted a microwave oven, a minivan, or a DVR. They couldn't tell you they wanted you to radiate their food. But what they could tell you is that they weren't getting home in time to cook a healthy meal. They didn't have time to watch their favorite shows, and they were having to cart an ever-increasing number of kids, dogs, and sporting equipment to myriad places. So they can tell you their pain, and you must talk to customers to understand that. As I say to CEOs, whether you are a startup CEO or you are a Fortune 500 CEO, that surveys are statistically significant and strategically irrelevant, because all you've done is outsource your visceral understanding and empathy for the customer to somebody else. So you've got to go and understand customer pain. We'll talk more about that in a second. Then you take that pain and you marry it with the art of the possible. What are the current trends in technology that you can leverage to basically solve that pain? Uber doesn't exist if we don't have real-time payments, mobile phones, GPS. So if we didn't have that, you couldn't solve that particular pain. But your job as an entrepreneur or as a large company is to stay current on the art of the possible that you can leverage to solve that customer pain. And then the third thing, which is super important, is that we place a series of small bets. When we think about funding in Silicon Valley, we think of funding like an onion. Every layer of onion is a layer of risk. It could be financial risk, it could be technical risk, it could be market risk, or in the case of a large company, it could be governance risk. You love it to death or you starve it of oxygen. And so the goal and the job of any entrepreneur is basically to figure out how you are going to remove the greatest amount of risk on the least amount of capital, which means you're going to identify that risk. You are going to figure out the experiments and small bets and pilots that you can run that can prove you can mitigate that risk. You're going to identify the metrics and milestones that demonstrate you can mitigate it. And then you get to unlock subsequent rounds of funding. This is super important. So that's really the underlying philosophy. The goal ultimately for those of you who are, serial entrepreneurs is to build a pipeline and portfolio of ventures to drive meaningful growth. For investors, this is what they're looking at. For large companies, they're trying to basically do venture building at scale. And you need to think about your venture building across the spectrum of new venture creation, from ideate to incubate to accelerate to scale. For large companies, to do that, they have to basically build a growth engine. And that growth engine needs to have 4 arrows in their growth engine quiver. Okay. So they must do organic venture building. They need to do venture investing, because build is one option. Investing is another option. Strategic partnering, where they don't invest anything, but they basically take startups in and do proof of concept with them and become good strategic partners with them. And then what we call targeted M&A. So sometimes for you as entrepreneurs, you should be looking for these large companies who might want to invest in you, who might want to partner with you strategically, or you might be a really good candidate for them to acquire, to augment an existing or accelerate an existing venture that they might be doing. So whether you are a large company, you should be thinking about this, but even as a startup, you should be thinking about large companies and their need to do this, and how you might, play a role with any of these large companies. So I'm going to just hit venture investing very quickly, because for most of you on this call, you're not going to be doing a lot of venture investing. But for those of you who are part of large companies, it is important, because venture investing and venture building are really the yin and the yang of each other. And it's important for large companies to realize they have a spectrum of tools available to develop a growth portfolio, from open innovation and partnering to like Halliburton Labs. For those of you who might be entrepreneurs in the new energy space, you should look at Halliburton Labs. You should look at other large companies who are basically putting together accelerators where they're going to give you access to their channels, their customers, their scientists, their labs. There's lots of opportunities for kind of collaboration and cooperation between startups and large companies. So those that have CVCs or those that have accelerators are good targets for the general startup population to be looking at for partnership reasons. So in some cases, corporates do build CVCs, and those CVCs become really valued investors in a lot of startups. So be looking for that as well. And then obviously, as we talked about, the corp dev and the M&A. As I said, the venture building and the investing are really the yin and the yang of growth for large companies. So that's all I've got a whole bunch of detail on the venture investing side, but because most of the audience is focused on, pure startups, I'm going to move on to basically the whole activity of venture building. And as I said, from ideate to incubate to accelerate to scale. So let's start with ideate. Where are you getting your idea? What are you doing with your ideas? Remember, garbage in, garbage out. And there are a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs have, ideas, and then they just go and start to build. Well, that's not where we start. That's not where we let you start. And often with clients that we're working with, sometimes they have too many ideas. And so we'll do a portfolio review like any venture capitalist would. Sometimes they have a domain that they want to explore. But you can't, and sometimes startups do the same thing. They're like, oh, I want to incubate something in water. Well, you can't incubate water, but you can incubate a zero water home. So you really have to be thinking about it. And so you even as a pure startup entrepreneur may be wanting to do some ecosystem mapping or domain exploration before you land on a particular idea that you're going to launch. You want to see where the money is going. You want to see how a particular domain segments. You want to test where there might be other competition, and competition can also be partners. So that's sometimes for entrepreneurs, we say, look, you got to go back and do some homework. But often you have a great idea. And so you say, where do we start? And so I'm going to focus on this third bucket, which is challenge framing. If you are an entrepreneur, whether you are inside a big company or you are a pure entrepreneur somewhere in the world, we believe you only need 2 things to get started. One is a challenge statement that provides some focus and some boundaries. The second is a stakeholder map, so you know whose pain you're trying to solve. So what is a challenge statement? A challenge statement basically is something that establishes your aspiration or your moonshot. it points to some early hypotheses on what's the pain you're trying to solve that you're going to go and test with actual customers, potential customers. And it provides you some boundaries. So you're not trying to be all things to all people, which is a sure sign of being failure, basically, if you're trying to be all things to all people. When we think of a challenge statement, and if you have the book, for any of you who have the book, there's a tool in there that talks about, we go into challenge statement in depth. And a lot of this stuff, there's more in depth in the book, because the book is really designed to be, as I said, a how-to guide to really democratize what we do and make what we're doing accessible to startups and NGOs and nonprofits and regions and small and medium-sized businesses. So when you think about your challenge statement, the way I want you to think about writing it is like, okay, how might we, what do you want to accomplish for, who are the people who matter most, in a way that describe the approach, the mindset, the values that you want your venture to embody, so that, and you describe the big impact you want to make. And that is your initial hypothesis. That challenge statement will pivot and you will iterate on it as you go through, but you've got to have that as a starting point, along with the who matters most, your stakeholder map. Now, when I talk about a stakeholder map, that's not just potential customers who you want to be interviewing about your idea or about the pain you think you're trying to solve, but you will also be looking for potential partners or potential value chain or suppliers that you might have to use. If you're in a regulated industry, you need to think about the regulators, potential partners. So but most of all, you're looking for who might be potential customers for us. Now, one word of caution, when you will see on here that there are segments that you want to go after, and then there are key personas. A lot of people make the mistake when they think about who matters most. They say, oh, our clients are going to be technology companies. They're going to be banks. They're going to be retail chains. Well, guess what? Retail chains don't buy. Banks don't buy. The CFO of a bank buys. The head of marketing at a retail chain buys. The CEO of a company buys. The head of HR buys. The people buy. A company doesn't buy. So you've got to be very careful that what you're looking for, who are the personas, who is it that you actually want to interview? So that's really great. Now you've kind of done the pre-work you need to do to get to an idea, to get to a hypothesis, to get to an understanding of the pain you're trying to solve. Now you can go into incubate. And when we think about incubate, we think of incubate in basically 3 stages, very much similar to a lot of classic incubators, except we always start with finding customer pain. If there's no customer pain, you have to be honest with yourselves and you have to kill the venture. However, if you find a ton of pain, then you get to move to the next part, which is, okay, what kind of product, service, solution can we bring to bear to a customer to solve that pain? Guess what? If it's time travel, we don't have time travel. And so if the product isn't feasible to build, or you can't partner, buy, or invest to build it, then you got to put it on a shelf until the day comes when you can actually leverage real technology or opportunity to bring that to market. And then, but if there's tons of customer pain, the product is feasible to build, then you get to go and you get to build a very robust business and execution plan. When we think about customer development, we say customer development never sleeps. This is a very important distinction. We do not use the word user research, because every single interview you do is a chance for you to hook a customer, to have them say, ooh, you know what? You're really listening to me. You're not bringing your confirmation bias. You're not trying to really just sell me something. You're actually listening for pain and trying to solve what I'm telling you. And so you will move from open-ended pain point interviews, and you're going to hear a lot of, you'll start to hear patterns. Then you're going to move to storyboard interviews. And I'll come to that in a second. But the point is that every one of these things is an opportunity to move a customer through your pipeline, ultimately, so that by the end of that 12 weeks, you actually should have pilots and customers raising their hand ready to go. So you will move through 3 types of testing, which I'll go a little bit more into detail, from open-ended to value proposition to solution to basically prototype testing. And in some cases, if you're doing digital, it's a wireframe. If you're doing hardware, it's going to be a mock-up. If you're doing experiences, it's going to be a simulation. You should expect in 12 weeks to do somewhere between 150 to 400 conversation, Zoom-based, face-to-face interviews with customers. We can go more into that. Over the course of the 12 weeks, we say customer development never sleeps. So up the team, everyone on the team, whether you are the engineer or the CEO or the go-to-market person or the operations person, everyone is doing customer interviews. So that's really, really important. At some point, when you start to hear the consistency in the pain, then a group will start to split off and start to work on the product. Once you know the product is feasible, that product team will continue, and then you will have a team that's basically working on the defining the business. But you see, none of these things really ever stop. But the number one thing, if you take away one thing from here, is customer insight becomes the currency of credibility, and everything else is uninformed opinion. You get to fall in love with your idea, but if the customers are telling you, and you're really listening, that what you've got isn't going to fly, you've got to fall out of love with your idea. Just don't keep pounding away. When we look at the types of interviews, as we said, you really need to do a ton of interviews. And so you will go out, you'll be requesting it. Sometimes you'll do a set of interviews in a country, but you need to validate, if you want to be globally scalable, you want to validate that that finding in other areas. That's very important, because you want to make sure that you're not building something bespoke for a single market. So as I said, the first type of interview you're going to do are open-ended discovery. In the book, we have actual scripts that you guys can leverage, but it really is, you are not saying, hey, do you like the blue one or the red one? You're starting way back. Tell me about the time you tried to rent a new office. Tell me about the time you tried to cook a healthy meal. And tell me about the time you tried to deal with the issue of remanufacturing, if you're a hardware like Hitachi. Ultimately, what you're looking for in those pain point interviews is a summary and a synthesis of the pain that you're hearing. At some point, you will literally be able to finish the customer's sentences. You will be able to imagine what they're going to say next. That's your key, that you are ready to move on. Before you move on, though, one of the things I want to point out is that it is very, very important that you guys document everything that you do. Especially if you're in a big company and you're an entrepreneur, you need apples to apples, and you need to basically build a database of all the ventures that you're doing, all the prototypes you've tested, all the storyboards you've run, et cetera. But even if you're in a pure startup, having the discipline to document, to have customer quotes, to know what you've tested in the past, because there is a lot of turnover, is really important. So we happen to use Airtable. Pricewaterhouse was a client of ours. They couldn't use Airtable, so we used Google Drive. You can use anything you want, but you see all these tabs up here, and we'll give you a copy of this presentation. It's really important to document, have the discipline to do that. So once you've done your pain point interviews, now you're going to be moving into what we call storyboard interviews, where you're going to start to test product, service, solution ideas. And typically those storyboards have 4 components to them. There's a setting, you set up attention, you basically share an experience, and then the ultimate benefit. And you're getting responses from people. You can do them in any form. Anybody can draw a storyboard. In fact, the neuroscience will tell you to not have very finished storyboards when you're interviewing customers. If you do, you will get false positives, because people will feel sorry for you because you put so much into them. So what you really need to do is to just hand draw them, and you can do them in any language. This happens to be one we were doing for a venture in Spanish. We've done them in China. We've done them in Nigeria. We've done them basically all over the world, and storyboards work across every type of demographic. You need to do lots of them, right? So you might do 5 storyboards in a day. You'll listen, you'll pivot, you'll redraw, you'll listen, you'll pivot, you'll redraw, and you're testing. Ultimately, you are using, quantitative analysis in the sense of you will be testing the permutations. So you'll be using NPS scoring, like most of you will do, where you're going to be asking, hey, how likely are you to recommend this? Or do you, kind of however you're going to phrase that question. But it's not just NPS score you're looking for. You also must rank the scenario. So often we'll put 3 scenarios or 3 storyboards in front of a client. And the reason we do that is because we then will want to rank where this comes out on their hierarchy of needs. Because you can have people giving you a 9 and a 10 all day long, but then you find out that the pain that you're solving is a 1, right? With 10 being the highest and 1 being the lowest, guess what? You have no business. So it's very important that you not just use NPS, but you also rank that. It's also important that you're very consistent with your script. When we have people do interviews, whether you are a pure startup or you are a startup inside of a big company, we have people so that you don't end up with this apples to oranges, throw spaghetti against the wall. You use the script, you iterate the script, and you typically have 2 people interviewing because it's hard to interview and hear what the customer is saying at the same time you're taking notes and thinking about what you want to probe next. So that's a very important. Ultimately, the magic moment in any incubate is actually not at the end when you have the business and execution plan. It's when you basically realize that you can move from pain to product. That's the really exciting thing, that you've got tons of pain. You can imagine a product that's feasible to build and people are rating it highly. Now you're on the downhill glide, and now you're going to move to basically further building that product, and then you're ultimately going to move to building the business plan. So as you move into the product, you're saying, hey, what should we build? Can we build it? Can we deliver it? You are going to start to move into prototype testing. So you've done your open-ended pain point interviews, you've done your value proposition storyboard interviews. Now you're moving into solution testing with prototypes. Again, just like with storyboards, you're starting with low res so you can get real feedback from people. Ultimately, you'll move to more medium res and then to high res in terms of the prototypes you're using. Again, if it's digital or if it's hardware or if it's the experience and you're simulating, you're moving from there. You're also asking the question, can we build it, right? So this is, can you, is there enough, this happens to be a new venture we were doing for Purina, where it was integrated hardware software product to basically identify the pain that people wanted to solve was they wish their pet could talk to them. And so it turns out that you can actually tell mood in humans from heart rate variability, not heart rate, but heart rate variability. And you can actually tell the same in pets, whether or not they're sad, they're in pain, they're happy. And the issue is, though, that when you put those heart rate variability monitors on humans, we don't have any hair. Dogs had hair. So one of the things they had to ask was, could they get the signal fidelity to be good enough to basically be able to build it? So it's very cool. Then you're going to start to talk about the architecture. Can you build it? What's the minimum viable product that you can build that you can then add features to, et cetera. You're also going to ask the question, hey, if we can't build it, are there more, what are the other options? Can we buy, partner, invest? That's why going all the way back to the beginning during the ideate, if you've done some ecosystem mapping and you know who else is out there in the world in terms of big companies or other startups that you could partner with, now you've got some targets that you could go after. Okay, you've got customer pain, you've got a great product. Now the ultimate outcome is, the understanding of the big opportunity, your high MVP hypothesis, and the initial product roadmap. Now you're going to move to building the business and execution plan. If we have time at the end, I'll share one, but if in the book, there's literally page by page, every single one of these items, we show you examples of how to build them. But it's very important not to just build a demo deck, but to literally have a very robust business execution operating plan that covers, hey, where we've been, the market, the pain we've heard, what's the big opportunity framework, what's the customer journey before you and then after you, your product vision and MVP, the product and tech roadmap, obviously, your go-to-market and your monetization plan, your operating and execution plan. If you're inside of a large company, you're going to have an ask for your initial seed funding. If you're a traditional startup, you are also going to have an ask for your seed funding or your Series A or your Series B. If you're in a big company, there's a governance question. There's still a governance issue when you think about being a startup. You still have venture capitalists who sit on your board or others. And then there's kind of risks and competition, why you think you are differentiated to be able to deliver this. And then most importantly, do it on Monday. Like, what are the things, if you get funding that day, what are the things you are literally going to start the next day? Okay, gone through ideate, you had an amazing idea. You've gone through incubate. Congratulations, you are funded. That is awesome. Now you move to the absolutely hardest stage that nobody pays attention to, accelerate. So accelerate is now when you've been funded and now you're in the market trying to get from 0 to 1, trying to get from product to the proof of product market fit to and early revenue. And when we think about the accelerate phase, we actually think about it in 3 stages. There's a build to validate phase, a build to automate phase, and a build to grow phase. And that's really important. They roughly are equivalent to seed funding, Series A, Series B. But most people skip the build to validate phase. They get funded, they just go build. They don't realize this is where I was talking about. You need to be placing small bets and running experiments, okay? It's very, very important. So you've got to think about these phases. And then when we think about these phases, you also have to be thinking in terms of what we call 5 swim lanes. Yes, super exciting. You're going to work on your product, your service, your solution, your platform, whatever it is. That's only one of 5 things you need to actually build a viable business. So yes, you should be doing your Wizard of Oz experiments and doing your pilots and launching your MVP and running experiments there and testing and iterating and pivoting. But you must also place small bets and run experiments in the other 4 areas. What is your go-to-market plan? How are you going to acquire customers? Are you field sales? Are you inside sales? Are you digital sales? What is the model you're going to use? Secondly, or third, in this case, business model. How are you going to price? How do people want to pay? Are you subscription? Are you a fee for service? What is the model that you're going to use? Because that goes hand in hand with the next thing, which is operations. What is your company going to look like? What is your org chart going to look like? How are you bringing the product to market? How are you, if you're manufacturing, where are you manufacturing? What's it going to cost you? Because you can get product right, go to market right, and the business model right. But if you don't get the operations right and you can't get to positive unit economics, there's no way you're going to survive. And then the last is team. This is really important. Can you recruit and retain the team? What I say to entrepreneurs all the time is, remember, 100% of nothing is exactly nothing. So be thinking about what your cap table looks like. Similarly, for large companies, we say, listen, you know how to pay for performance. You pay salespeople for performance all the time. There's no reason that you cannot incentivize your internal entrepreneurs in the same way, in the form of phantom shares or performance bonuses, et cetera. So you got to be really thinking about this accelerate phase. You also have to have the will to kill. Killing ventures is not a failure. In Silicon Valley, we will often hire people whose venture failed because they learned a lot on somebody else's nickel. And so now they are a far more experienced entrepreneur. So it is really not a failure, but basically throwing good money after bad is never a good idea. For those of you in big companies, one venture is not enough. No venture capital general partner invests in only one company. You need to adopt a portfolio mindset. And therefore, we're working with a lot of large companies basically to build their internal venture factory to institutionalize and scale these growth efforts for decades to come. The chief human resources officers, we become the darling for those guys as well, because they're very excited about the fact that we're helping them recruit and retain people who might otherwise go to startups, but now they're getting a chance to do startups inside of large companies. Okay, last piece is kind of seizing the mothership advantage. For those of you who are in big companies, this is literally seizing your mothership's advantage. For those of you who are startups, this is a way to think about both your venture capital board members, how you're going to seize the advantage that they bring, and how to make sure that they are bringing the value to you that you would expect as your investors. And also, as you look to corporates as your partners, what you should be expecting from them to make sure that they are good strategic partners, because many of them don't do what they need to do, and therefore they will waste your time. Wasting your time means burning your cash. And so you want to make sure that you need corporates, you need them as customers, you need them as potential investors. So this is relevant to both of you guys. So for large companies, the corporate venture building and investing isn't the hard part. It is this seizing the mothership advantage. And so when we think about whether it's a startup or it's an internal startup, there are some preconditions for success, right? You need a full-time venture team. You need someone who's the CEO or the general manager of that. You will need access to seed funding. You need a fully engaged new venture board, whether they are your venture capitalists or they are internal venture capitalists made up of senior executives, and an early consideration for large companies of what they're going to do with their ventures. Are they going to spin them in? Are they going to make them wholly owned subsidiaries? Are they going to spin them out? For any of you who have board members, you want your board members engaged, okay? They need to deliver the funding and go no good decisions. They need to ensure your venture can get access to customers, channels, and markets. They can provide access to core competencies, assets, and capabilities of the organization if they are part of a large company, or out of their network if they are a traditional venture capitalist. And for large companies, they need to remove the mothership friction to ensure the new venture can reach escape velocity. If you are an entrepreneur inside of a large company, there are lots of things that can get in the way. But what we talk about with the new venture boards is what are the from to shifts that large companies have to make to ensure their internal ventures can reach escape velocity. Could be compensation, could be policies, it could be procurement. And that's really, really important. Because if you think about the Silicon Valley grew up in service of its startups and its entrepreneurs. It really is, Silicon Valley Bank does not look like a bank out of Atlanta. Fenwick, Oric, Wilson Sonsini, none of these guys look like law firms in London, okay? And so it's really important for those of you who are startups to make sure that you have surrounded yourself with people who really understand and can help and mentor you and be there for you to, in essence, grow your venture. And for those of you inside large companies, you need to be asking, how are we going to bring the Silicon Valley inside? How are we going to create what we call new venture advocates who are in the functions and departments to ensure that you can reach escape velocity? For those of you interested, the Mach 49 name comes from that. Mach 37 is actually escape velocity, but that name was taken. So I needed a number bigger than 37 for my wonky physics friends and in Silicon Valley. And so we picked 49 because at that time, we had lots of large companies flocking to Silicon Valley looking for gold, like the gold miners did in 1849. So that's the story behind the name. So, but everyone can help, right? In large companies, you need new venture advocates, just as startups in any traditional sense need advocates. So who in legal is going to help you write that one-page term sheet for pilots, not the 40-page term sheet? Who in procurement is going to get that hardware prototyper through procurement in 2 weeks, not 2 months, if you don't have one pre-approved in your vendor list? Who in marketing is not going to be the brand police? Who in HR knows what a growth hacker is? So it's really important to do that. We truly believe everyone can win. And I think one of the things is whether you are a startup entrepreneur or you are an internal entrepreneur in terms of a large company, there really are 3 types of people. And if you are a startup entrepreneur, you guys have heard the stories of founders being swapped out at the point of a company going public because they've reached the end of kind of where their skills can take them, but they can then go do it again. They can still be founders. You need to be really, again, open because, as I said, 100% of nothing is exactly nothing. So, there are those people who are entrepreneurs or internal entrepreneurs. They're the idea minute people. They can handle ambiguity. They like to talk to customers. They love the pace. They don't mind the lack of structure. Those people ultimately will hand off to what we call growth geniuses. Those are typically people, and some founders grow into this, who can basically grow a company 20, 30, 40% a year. They're the people who basically can put the systems and processes in place to make you a real company. And then ultimately they pass off to the people who, if you look at all the big companies in Silicon Valley, they were once startups. They are now being run by what we call efficiency experts who can actually manage a business, drive operating efficiency, reduce the cost without reducing quality. And so you just got to think about where you are on this spectrum, because every one of these types of people are really, really valuable. So I'm going to close with saying, look, why do people do venture building? There were 2 altruistic reasons that I founded Mach 49. One is that people are living longer and longer because of healthcare and technology, and those people need meaningful, purposeful work. And so I truly believe that, and as much as we love our startups, many of those people are employed by large companies. And so they need to look more like Berkshire Hathaway. They need to be enabling and partnering with startups to basically create more creativity and creative and purposeful work for people. And the second thing is, look, the big hairy problems we face as the world, from climate change to water to disease to racism to poverty to education, need our large companies and our startups able to innovate, disrupt, and experiment to basically drive the change we need, and to partner together and to collaborate. And so we're finding lots of large companies that are doing this. You know, Goodyear basically has both an internal incubator and they have a CVC investing in those of you who are startups. And they're doing that to accelerate disruption from just looking at tires to basically mobility reimagined. You have people like Pernod Ricard, who basically are looking, who are in currently the wine and spirits business. You may know them as Mumm Champagne, Jameson Whiskey, Absolute Vodka. But now they're realizing that there's an opportunity for them to make a from to shift from the $300 billion wine and spirits space to the $3 trillion experience economy. And then, and I will leave you with this one, there are those who are out to change the world. And I'm going to leave you with this little video.
Hello, we are already in 2022. Time is flying, and I'm looking forward to the new year. Our OmniBridge engineering team is thriving. We're building an AI-based solution enabling real-time conversation between deaf ASL users and hearing English speakers, creating a seamless translation without delays and misinterpretations. Our engineering team has made vast improvements. Our product is now progressing much faster than in 2021. I'm looking forward to how our product will change the world. We want to create a more inclusive environment for hearing and deaf people. It's not only for deaf people, it's for hearing people too. Everyone will benefit as we bring the deaf and hearing worlds together. And that is OmniBridge's big vision.
Adam is an amazing human being. He is the CEO of that venture. I'll let you guess the Mothership. This one, he came out of a venture competition. He is both deaf and mute. And his venture is extraordinary. So now is the time to disrupt markets, to build and invest in new ventures, really to drive meaningful, sustainable growth for you, for your team members, your companies, your communities, and truly, yes, even our world. So with that, I'm going to close and open it for questions.
Linda, thank you so much. What a great overview. You got through it all. And wow, there's so much more in the book, as I know. We dropped the link into the book in the chat function. Yeah, we're going to roll with some questions from the audience. So if you haven't dropped questions for Linda into the Q&A box so far, please do so. We'll try to get to them all. So Linda, you discussed a little bit about this in your talk, but I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into this. And so do you have any strategic advice on how to grow during difficult socioeconomic times?
Yes, we'll talk about that. Hey, I do want to do a call out to Hani, who was talking about the Shell Game Changer program. So when I was CEO of Strategos, we actually built that Game Changer program. So Gary, I founded Strategos with Gary Hamill. So now you understand how, like, I don't. We talked about we have to have gray hair, no hair. I don't have a lot of gray hair yet, but that'll date me for sure. So that's really cool that you worked on Game Changer, and we've done a lot of work for Shell actually. So it's cool. So yeah, so look, the biggest issue, and there's a lot of really good commentary out there. Bill Gurley has really good commentary. You've got Sequoia Capital issued kind of a really good statement. AH issued a really good statement, kind of like, what do you need to do if you're a startup entrepreneur, and bring you back in, kind of what you need to be focused on. So the number one thing is, right, you've got to manage your cash. So that's key. And so if you can, but you also cannot stop talking to customers. The only way you will come out of it, and I have lots of statistics, I won't bore you with them, but the best time to invest is actually in a downturn. This is Warren Buffett's, right? Be fearful when others are greedy, be greedy when others are fearful. This is an amazing opportunity to basically get in and to grow and to be ready kind of with that disruption when the world comes out of it sometime. I think that the pundits are saying, third quarter, fourth quarter of next year. So really number one is just make sure that you're managing your cash. That's the number one thing. But the second thing is make sure what you're working on matters. Make sure it matters. And the only way you're going to know if it's mattering, and it costs you nothing to interview customers. If you're surveying them, yeah, and you're spending all that money on that, but it costs you nothing to pick up the phone and to basically do your stakeholder map and basically make sure you're doing that. So it's just, you just got to wait it out. We've had a zillion upturns and a zillion downturns, and it always turns around. And, it's really just being patient and continuing to do what you need to do to prove you've got serious pain that you're trying to solve.
I love that advice. And yeah, you quoted John Chambers earlier, who was a close friend of the center. We asked him to talk right when 2020 and the pandemic hit, because you mentioned, if you don't disrupt yourself, the market will disrupt you. So
Right.
I think it's great advice. We have a question here from an attendee. Thanks for the questions. Drop them in the Q&A. Any advice for somebody with a big dream but no technical background? They want to create the tech but don't have the capability to do so.
We love people like that. So Paul Graham, who is the legendary founder of Y Combinator, basically did a big piece of research. And what he basically determined is that the best startups are those who have two founders. One is a technical founder and the other is not. Full stop, not, because those people are the ones who will, often technical founders will literally just think, oh, I've got this cool thing and I'm going to go build it and then I'm going to go and everybody's going to love it, etc. And that is just completely backwards. You just do not want to be building before you've actually talked to people. And so the other founder, if you've got a great idea, then it really is about saying, okay, who can I find and there's lots of sources to find kind of a co-founder. And a co-technical founder. You can go to meetups, you can go to the universities and see who's there. You can look for grad students. You can look for, and so it really is, you taking your idea, you can share your idea. And again, 100% of nothing is nothing. So basically sharing a cap table with another founder, even if that's not the person who had the idea, but they're the person who can help you bring the idea to life, is super critical. And so it's really, we love people who, in essence, you become the customer success person. You become the person with potentially the business savvy, customer development. We have many of our Global 1000 clients. We have some of the people who have been on the team who've gone off. So Branch Insurance, if you guys go look at Branch, I think it's ourbranch.io, that they are a complete unicorn now, leveraging all of what Mach 49 has done. They were somebody who spun out. Audit Insights is another group that did. And really, a lot of these have two founders. They had a technical founder, and then they had the idea person. And together, they make an amazing team.
Great advice. Another one, you talked about some of the economic downturn survival mode when it comes to making sure cash is tight. But somebody asked a question here on what are some of the most important things to think about when pivoting to keep my business afloat?
Well, pivots shouldn't, again, it depends on the stage you're in when you pivot, right? So if you're very early and you're still trying to figure out what your product market fit is, it doesn't cost you that much to pivot. Also, if you're doing software, you're doing versus hardware, it really depends on who you are. But, massive pivots are a sign that you didn't place small bets and run experiments and do the customer interviews that you needed to do early on, right? So you're paying the price of not having done, you're remediating work that you should have done in the first place, right? And so when you're doing a pivot, it's kind of like you got to pretend like you're starting over. And this is where you, again, need to be doing your customer development work. You need to be, running pilots, small experiments, trying to remove the greatest amount of risk on the least amount of capital. And so, and pivots are completely fine. You just pivoting early stage, no problem. Pivoting late, really challenging. And so just remembering that you have got to stay connected to the customer at all times, regardless of the type of industry you're in or the type of product or service or solution that you're creating. You just have to be constantly connected to the customer to make sure you're continuously driving that pain, solving that pain. Otherwise, you're going to just get it out over your skis, and then that becomes painful. And especially if you're doing too much engineering early, and then you end up with all this technical debt, and then it like becomes very difficult to pivot.
Yep. And speaking of staying close to customers, somebody asked a question that says, do you recommend the founders doing the surveying and drawing interviewing themselves or outsourcing that work? And I think I know your answer, but I wanted to ask this.
Do not outsource. You are not allowed to outsource. If you can't tell me, in fact, not only are you not allowed to outsource, ultimately, yes, you can get to, you're going to do A/B testing, you're going to do more quantitative stuff, but you should have done 150 to 400 interviews amongst the team. And that is literally by Zoom, face-to-face, by phone, but where you're talking. Why? You can't get tone. You can't get emotion. You can't get nuance. You can't probe and go deeper to basically if you aren't actually talking to the customer or working with the customer. And so once you start to hear those patterns, you can expand it. But you have to have visceral understanding and empathy for your customer, or you will just, it'll be this objective thing you're doing as opposed to something that you're truly passionate about and you believe is really going to make a difference.
Yep. And to build off that a little bit, somebody else asked a question on how to gather thoughts from an employee. So I'm guessing this is a little bit bigger than just a guy, and a dog in a garage, but their employee has been witnessing customer pains and how to gather that information from them and explore the iteration throughout the process.
Yeah. So often what we will do, if you're in a bigger company, well, it doesn't really matter either way. Often what we'll do is create an idea portal. So in some companies, we will, like at Intel, we did a venture competition. That's where Adam came from. And so, you can run venture competitions, but there's good ways to do it and not so good ways to do it. There's a chapter in the book on this, but so when you want to be soliciting ideas, what you want is, again, in the book, there's a new venture assessment tool that says, look, here are 5 tests to put on an idea. Like, is it feasible? Does anybody want it? Is there a business model there, et cetera? And you want to basically have, when people submit ideas, you want to make sure that they've thought through those 5 different levers, because otherwise what you're going to get is a giant suggestion box of basic junk. And so if people are really hearing customer pain, then you want them to basically bring that back to you and say, look, here's my challenge statement. How might we, do X, Y, and Z? And then we can go test it. And this is what we say to CEOs all the time as well, right? We make CEOs get involved. We make them sit in on customer interviews, right? The new venture board doesn't get a hall pass and it goes to somebody else. They don't get to sit back and be management review board members. They actually have to participate in the process. Now, not a ton, because they also have to run the core and legacy business. But we want people who basically have tested it. And we say to people, look, if you have an idea, that's great. Put it in a storyboard. Let's test it. Everything you talk about can be tested, but it has to be tested with real potential customers or stakeholders of some sort.
Oh, that's wonderful advice. And we are at time. And Linda, thank you so much for spending time to share your wisdom over the years, through all of your experience inside and throughout the startup journey. So thank you so much.
Awesome. All right, you guys.
Amazing. Well, if you want to check out Linda's book, I highly recommend it. We've got a link in there. It is a tactical workbook and it's an amazing read, super easy. And it's got a lot more than just this talk in there. Also, if you want to get in touch with Linda and follow up, we've got our email in there and we'll follow up with it in the following email. But Linda, thank you so much on behalf of everyone on and everyone in attendance today.
Yeah, guys, turn the pages, underline, and do good and have fun. That's what matters.
I love it. And for those of you still on, thanks for joining. We've got a bunch of other webinars coming up in the next couple of weeks and of course, coming months. So we look forward to welcoming you all back online soon. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.